I am 30 years old. I own a construction and design company in Rhode Island, and I built every single thing I have without $1 from my parents. What I am about to tell you is not a story about hatting my family. It is a story about what happens when you spend years trying to be seen by people who have already decided what you are, and what happens after you finally stop trying. My parents gave my brother $340,000 for a house, and called me the family failure in the same breath. That was the last night I sat at their table. Before I go any further, I want to know where you are watching from right now. Drop your city or state in the comments. I read every single one. And if this kind of story is something you want more of, hit that like button and subscribe, because I have a lot more to say and I am just getting started. Now let me take you back to Pittsburgh, where this all began. I grew up in Pittsburgh in a house where everything was measured, not in inches or pounds, but in grades, rankings, and whether or not what you did looked good to other people. My father worked in accounting at an insurance company. My mother taught high school English. We were not wealthy, but we were comfortable, and my parents had a very clear picture of what a successful life looked like. A 4-year university with a name people recognized, a job with a salary and benefits, and a wardrobe that included collared shirts. My brother Zaire is 3 years younger than me. He was, by every standard my parents used, the easier child. He sat still, he studied, he brought home the grades they expected, and he did not ask uncomfortable questions about why the backyard needed to look a certain way or why the broken chair in the corner could not just be fixed instead of thrown out. I was the other kind of child. From the time I was small, I could not leave things the way they were. At 7 years old, I took apart a wooden chair that had a broken leg and tried to put it back together using nails I found in the garage and wood glue from my father's shelf. My father walked in, looked at what I was doing, and walked back out without saying a word. At 9, I used bricks from a pile in the backyard to lay a small path through the garden to the apple tree in the corner. My mother found it, told me to clean it up because it looked messy, and that was the end of that. My grades were average to decent. I never failed a class, but I never made the honor roll the way Zaire did once he hit middle school. At family dinners, my father would ask Zaire about his test scores, his teachers, his plans. With me, the question was usually something like anything new at school. And when I answered, he would nod and move the conversation somewhere else. I heard my aunt tell my mother once that Zaire was the one to watch. Nobody corrected her. Nobody said anything about me at all. The summer I turned 12 is the summer I need to tell you about, because it is where I understood something about my family that I had only felt before without being able to name it. My parents let Zaire and me spend that summer in the backyard while they worked. There was an old oak tree in the corner of the yard, and I decided I was going to build a treehouse in it. Not a platform. An actual small structure with walls, a roof, a door that opened and closed, and a window cut into the side facing the garden. I drew the plans on graph paper first. Then I went to 3 neighbors and asked if they had any scrap wood they did not need. 2 of them said yes. I made several trips carrying wood back to the yard. I borrowed a hammer and nails from the garage. I built a small ladder first to get up into the branches, then I started framing the walls. It took 11 weeks. My fingers had small cuts on them for most of that time. My back hurt every evening from climbing and carrying. There were days I got the measurements wrong and had to take sections apart and redo them. Zaire came out occasionally, watched for a few minutes and went back inside. When I finished, I called my father out to see it. He stood in front of the treehouse for about 30 seconds. He looked at the roof, looked at the door, looked at the window. Then he said, "Okay, it's neater than I thought it would be." And he went back inside to watch television. I stood in the yard alone. I looked up at the treehouse, and for the first time I understood clearly that it did not matter how long something took me, how much effort I put in, or how good the result was. His attention was not something I was going to earn by doing things well. His interest lived somewhere else, and it had never included whatever it was I was building. That understanding did not make the following years easier, it just made them clearer. Through middle school and high school, the comparisons were open and regular. At the table, at family gatherings, when relatives came to visit. Zaire's accomplishments were the main topic. My direction was the open question that nobody seemed particularly invested in answering. A neighbor's daughter complimented a small wooden bookshelf I had built for my bedroom and mounted on the wall. My mother, who was standing nearby, said, "She just likes making little projects like that." The word she used was little. The bookshelf held 40 books and I had measured the shelves to fit my specific collection. Little projects like that was the category my parents put everything I made into. That phrase followed me through years of building, fixing, designing and creating, until I was old enough to leave Pittsburgh and build something they could not categorize anymore. In 11th grade, I knew exactly what I wanted to study. I had been reading about architecture and structural engineering for 2 years on my own. I wanted to understand how buildings worked from the foundation up, how materials behaved under weight and weather, how you designed a space that actually functioned for the people living in it. I researched technical programs, applied to New England Institute of Technology in Rhode Island, applied for financial aid and a partial scholarship, and put the whole application together myself, because I already knew that if I told my parents before I had an acceptance letter, the conversation would not go the way I needed it to go. When the acceptance letter came, I told them at dinner. My father's first question was whether the school had an economics program. My mother asked if I was sure, because it was not a school most people had heard of. Zaire, who was in 9th grade at the time and had absorbed the family's way of evaluating things, asked what the rankings were. Not one of the 3 of them asked what I was going to study, what drew me to the program, or what I planned to do with it. That night I made myself a clear promise. I was going, I was paying my own way as much as I could, and I was not going to ask them for anything. I kept that promise, and what happened because of it is the rest of this story. I worked my way through school in 3 jobs at different points: early morning coffee shop shifts, afternoon delivery work, and weekend construction labor for a small residential contractor who let me ask questions on the job site as part of the arrangement. The partial scholarship covered tuition. Everything else I covered myself. My parents did not send money, they called on major holidays. The calls were short and followed a pattern. How is school? Are you eating? Have you talked to Zaire lately? They were not asking because they wanted to know. They were asking because it was what you said when you called. In my 2nd year, I met Zenon in a group project on civil and residential design. He was studying construction engineering. He had this straightforward way of thinking about work. You do what you say you will do, you do it correctly, and you take pride in the result. We did not fall into anything quickly. We worked together for months before we became anything more than project partners. And by the time we were a real couple, we had already seen each other under deadline pressure and material constraints and sleep deprivation. And we both knew what we were working with. I graduated with honors. I did not go back to Pittsburgh for a ceremony. I did not have the money for the trip, and I did not want to need anything from my parents for what should have been my moment. Zenon drove us to a diner after my last final, and we split a stack of pancakes, and that was the graduation celebration. Zenon and I moved to Rhode Island after school because the residential construction market there was active. Land was more reasonably priced than in Boston or New York, and neither of us had ties pulling us somewhere specific. We wanted to build in a place where we were not anybody's child or anybody's story. We rented a small apartment, paid all our bills, and did not go on vacation for the first 2 years. I took freelance design work from small construction firms. Zenon took a job as a site engineer. We saved every dollar we did not absolutely need to spend. I started taking independent projects, kitchen renovations, converting storage spaces into livable rooms, additions for growing families. Word moved from one client to the next. By the end of my 2nd year out of school, I had a consistent client list and a reputation in the area for finishing on time and not inflating my estimates. During all of this, the calls from my parents continued on the same schedule and in the same format. They did not ask about my projects. They did not ask about Zenon's work or our plans. What they asked about was whether we had made any decisions about marriage yet, and whether we were thinking about coming home for the holidays. One evening I told my father I had just finished restoring a historic residential property in Providence, a project that had taken 4 months and required sourcing specific materials to match the original construction from decades earlier. He said, "That sounds like it kept you busy. Is the income stable doing that kind of work?" That was the entire response. No follow-up question. No curiosity about the building or what the work involved. Zaire by that point had taken a position at a financial investment firm in New York. My parents brought him up in every conversation. They told their neighbors, their colleagues, everyone at church. When relatives gathered, Zaire was what the gathering was about. I was the one who refreshed drinks and cleared plates. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I am telling you because I want you to understand what had accumulated by the time we all sat down at that Thanksgiving table, so that when I tell you what my father said, you understand that it did not come out of nowhere. It landed on top of everything that had already been building for years. My mother called in late October and asked if Zenon and I would come to Pittsburgh for Thanksgiving. She said the whole family would be there, some relatives from her side, a couple of my father's work friends, and it would be good to have everyone together. Zenon asked me what I wanted to do. I said we would go. I do not know exactly what I was hopping for. Maybe I was not hopping for anything specific. Maybe I just thought that showing up was still worth something. The dinner was at my parents' house. The table was full. Somewhere in the middle of the main course, my father stood up and said he had an announcement. He said that he and my mother had decided to give Zaire $340,000 to purchase a condominium in Manhattan. He said Zaire deserved a foundation to build his career from. He used the word deserved. He talked about investing in the future. I was holding a fork. Then my father said, still standing, still in his dinner voice, that they understood Idalia had always made her own choices, even if those choices were ones that no one quite understood, and so they figured the best they could do was let her keep handling things her own way. The way a failure figures it out. He said that word, failure, at a table with 15 people sitting around it, in a full sentence directed at me while I was holding a fork and no one said anything. Not one person at that table pushed back. Not one person looked at me to check if I was all right. Zenon put his hand over mine under the table. I did not move for a moment. I sat with it. 1, 2, 3. Then I set the fork down. I pulled my chair back. I stood up, walked to the coat rack and took my jacket. Zenon was right behind me. He had the car keys before we reached the door. We drove to the hotel without talking. I looked out the passenger window at streets I had grown up next to and thought about every single time I had tried. Every project, every phone call I had answered, every holiday I had shown up for. Every time I had described something I was proud of and watched the conversation move on to something else within 60 seconds. The next morning I sent my parents a text message. It was not long. I told them I would not be in contact going forward. Not out of anger, but because I had finally understood that continuing to reach would not change the outcome, and I was done spending energy on a direction that led nowhere. I wished them well, and I meant it. I turned off the notifications for their numbers, and I did not reach back. In the weeks after I stopped contact with my parents, I did not sleep well for about 2.5 weeks. Not because I was grieving in a way I could not function through, but because something had shifted and my system needed time to catch up to the shift. The clarity was real, so was the weight of it. Zenon and I sat at the kitchen table of our apartment one evening with a yellow legal pad and wrote down everything we had. $17,000 in joint savings, a list of 16 past clients who had expressed interest in future work, my design experience and certification, Zenon's construction engineering credential and 4 years of site management, and the fact that we had been doing this work well, and people in the area knew it. We filed the paperwork to register Idalia Custom Construction as a licensed residential construction and design company in Rhode Island. We set up a business account, printed basic materials, and I called every former client within the first 2 weeks to let them know I was now operating independently and taking new projects. The first month we had no new contracts. We used that time to build out our project portfolio documentation, take professional photographs of completed work, and build a basic website. The second month, a family in Cranston contacted us about a full kitchen renovation with a budget of $38,000. I designed the layout, selected materials, created the project timeline. Zenon managed the physical work with 2-day laborers. We finished 4 days ahead of schedule. The client posted a review online, mentioned us by name, said we communicated clearly and did not leave a mess. 3 weeks later, her neighbor called. The first year we completed 6 projects of varying scale. We covered our operating costs and added a small amount to savings each month. I handled design, client meetings, contracts, and month-end accounting. Zenon managed site operations. Neither of us had an assistant or an office manager. We worked from the apartment. The second year, a young couple in Warwick contacted us about building a new residential home from the ground up. Their budget was $110,000. It was the largest project we had taken to that point. I spent several late nights finishing the design documentation because I knew that delivering well on a project this size would open doors that smaller projects had not. We completed it on schedule. The clients were satisfied enough to invite us to the house's open day and introduce us to 3 separate organizations in the area. A local architecture-focused publication ran a short piece about the project, focusing specifically on the material choices and how the layout reflected the family's actual daily patterns rather than a generic floor plan. I read that article alone in the office at 9 at night. I did not call anyone. I left it on the desk, poured a second cup of coffee and kept working. Near the end of our second year in business, Zenon found a listing for 5 acres of undeveloped land in a quiet section of Rhode Island. The price was reasonable because the parcel had no paved road leading into it and required some grading work before construction could begin. We put down a deposit, secured a bank loan at a reasonable rate, and purchased the land. I designed our home myself, 3,000 square feet across 2 floors, 3 bedrooms, a dedicated workspace with a glass wall facing the back of the property, and a connected workshop building where the company could operate directly on site, with enough room for material storage, a drafting area, and a small conference space for client meetings. This was not a project I was doing to show anyone anything. This was the building I had been carrying in my head since I was 12 years old, standing under an oak tree in Pittsburgh. Zenon and I handled the majority of the construction ourselves. He managed the foundation work and structural framing with a crew of 4 experienced tradespeople we hired for that phase. I did the interior finish work, the wood wall paneling, the built-in cabinetry, the hardwood floor installation, and the custom shelving in every room. On days when I had finished my hours at the office, I went to the site and worked for several more hours before dark. Zenon brought coffee out to the unfinished porch some evenings and sat beside me on the raw subfloor. He said once, with nothing around us but framed walls and exposed insulation, "This is already our home." He was not wrong. 9 months after we broke ground, we moved in. I stood on the 2nd floor landing and looked out through the window at our 5 acres, and I felt something I had not felt in a long time, which was that I did not need to explain this to anyone or wait for anyone to decide whether it was good enough. After we moved the company operations to the new workshop, the volume and complexity of our work increased. We hired 2 design associates and a contracts manager. We began accepting projects involving historic renovation work and high-specification custom builds. A regional architecture publication contacted us about a potential feature. A commercial property management group reached out about a long-term renovation partnership. The company was functioning. It was growing at a pace we could manage without losing quality. We were not wealthy, but we were building something real, and it was ours. 2 years after the Thanksgiving dinner, Zaire was driving back from a client meeting in Providence. He took a shortcut his GPS suggested, a back road he had never used before, and he came around a curve and saw a small sign on the side of the road. Idalia Custom Construction, established 2022. He stopped the car. He had been on a long day. The meeting had run 6 hours. He was tired, his blood pressure had been giving him problems for the past year, and he was thinking about the report his supervisor had emailed that afternoon requesting additional analysis before the following morning. He sat in his car at the side of the road and looked at the sign, then looked at the paved driveway leading in, lined with trees on both sides, leading to a large grey craftsman-style house and a connected workshop with a white metal roof. He pulled in. Zenon was in the workshop with his back to the entrance, examining a wood panel. He turned when he heard the car, looked at Zaire for a moment and said, "You're Zaire." Zaire confirmed. Zenon said he would get me. I was at my desk with a set of drawings when Zenon appeared in the doorway. He said there was someone outside. I walked out and saw my brother standing in front of the workshop, looking at the house. When he heard me, he turned. He looked at me, then at the house, then back at me. He said, "You built this?" I said, "Yes." He did not say anything for a while, then he sat down on the front step. He put his face in his hands. I brought out 2 glasses of water and sat beside him. I did not push him to talk. He sat there for several minutes before he said anything. He asked how long I had been there. I told him 2 years of the business, 9 months of construction on the house, 2 years in this location. He nodded slowly. Then he took out his phone and called my father. I heard one side of the call. Zaire told him where he was. He described what he was looking at. His voice was not dramatic. It was the voice of someone processing information that was requiring more adjustment than expected. 2 days later, my parents drove from Pittsburgh to Rhode Island without calling first. They arrived in the late afternoon. I was in the workshop when Zenon came to the door and told me there was a car at the gate. I walked out and saw their vehicle. I stood at the workshop entrance and did not move toward them. My mother walked onto the property looking around slowly. My father came up behind her, stood straight, looked at the house and said, "It's really something." That was his opening. Not hello, not I have been thinking about what I said, just a statement about the property. I kept my arms at my sides and asked if there was something they needed. My mother began talking about how much time had passed, about family staying connected, about how she had been thinking about calling. Her tone was the tone of someone trying to establish that this was a normal visit. I let her finish, then I said, "I am going to say this once. I do not need an apology to move forward with my life, but if either of you wants to be part of my life from here, you need to understand what happened and not act like it did not. I know what I lived with, I know what was said at that table. I am not going to pretend otherwise to make this easier." My father looked at me, he looked at the house, he looked back at me. After a long pause he said, "We never said you couldn't do anything." I said, "You called me a failure in front of 15 people. I heard every word." The silence that followed was the longest one of the visit. My mother pressed her fingers together. My father looked at the ground. Neither of them said anything that moved us forward. There was no clarity in that moment, no acknowledgement that landed the way a real acknowledgement does. They left when the light was fading. I stood at the workshop entrance and watched their car disappear around the tree line, then I went inside and closed the door. 1 week after my parents' visit, Zaire called ahead and asked if he could come by. I said yes. He arrived in the morning, came into the kitchen and sat down with a cup of coffee. This time he talked. He told me that he had been working 14 to 15-hour days for 5 years at the investment firm. He told me he had been admitted to the emergency room twice in the past 2 years with elevated blood pressure, and that he was currently managing it with daily medication. He told me that the condominium in Manhattan, the one my parents had purchased with $340,000, had required him to take an additional loan because the unit he could present to colleagues and clients cost significantly more than what the purchase covered, and that he was currently paying more than half his monthly income toward that debt. Then he said something I was not expecting. He said, "I looked at your house and I thought, she got nothing and she built this. And I thought about what I have and what it cost me and I could not make the numbers work in any direction." I asked him a direct question. I asked if he liked his work. He sat with that for a moment. Then he said he was good at it. That is what he said first. He was good at it. Then he said he did not think he had ever asked himself whether he liked it, and that he was not sure he had a clear answer because the question felt unfamiliar. That was the most honest thing Zaire had said to me in a very long time, possibly ever. I told him about the company, about where we were and where we needed to go. I told him that Zenon and I were strong on the technical and operational side, but that we were leaving opportunity on the table, because neither of us had the time or the specific skill set to manage business development, client relationship strategy, and contract growth the way it needed to be managed if we were going to scale responsibly. I told him that what I was describing was a real position, that the first 2 years would not pay what Wall Street paid, and that he should not come in expecting that. He asked questions, practical ones, about revenue trajectory, about what the role would actually require day to day, about what growth looked like if the company continued at its current pace. These were good questions. I gave him honest answers. He told me he needed 2 weeks. I said take whatever time he needed. 17 days later he called and said he had submitted his resignation. My parents called both of us within 48 hours of learning about it. My father told Zaire he was making a decision that would set him back years. My mother told him the family would not understand, that it looked like he was giving up, that he was walking away from everything they had helped him build toward. Zaire listened to all of it, and then told them he understood their concern, and he had made his decision, and it was not going to change. He called me after and told me about both calls. His voice was steady, not cold, just steady. He said that was the first time I told them no and actually meant it. I did not make a big moment out of it. I just said, "Okay, see you Monday." The first month Zaire worked with us, he was visibly adjusting. No dress code requirements, no performance metrics reviewed by a committee, no quarterly ranking. He was uncertain about the pace and the informality, but his skills were immediately useful. He could read a contract faster than anyone I had worked with. He understood negotiation in a way that came from years of high-stakes work. and he noticed things in our business structure that Zenon and I had been too close to see. In his third month, he came to us with a proposal from a regional property management company looking for a consistent construction and renovation partner for a series of residential units. The contract was structured for 18 months with renewal options. I reviewed the terms and signed. I watched Zaire working at his desk in the small office next to the workshop one afternoon, and I thought about what he had said about never asking himself what he liked. He had not answered that question yet, not fully, but he was sitting in a place where the question was allowed to exist, and that was a start. 14 months after Zaire joined the company, we received a message from an architecture and design publication covering the New England region. They wanted to run a feature on Idalia Custom Construction, focusing on our approach to residential design, our use of sustainable materials, and what they called our client-centered philosophy. A writer came to the property, spent an afternoon with us, photographed the house and workshop, and interviewed both me and Zenon. The article ran 6 weeks later. It was substantial. It covered how the company started, what drove our design decisions, and what we believed construction should actually serve. A photo of the house ran on the opening page of the feature. Someone in my parents' extended family saw the article and sent it to my mother. My mother called. I answered. She told me she had seen the article. She said it was wonderful, that the house looked beautiful, that she had shown it to her friends. Her voice had a quality I recognized. It was the voice she used when she wanted to lead with something positive before getting to the real subject. I waited. She asked if Zenon and I would consider having the family come for a visit. She said she would cook, they would come to us, it would be low pressure. I told her I would think about it and I would call her back. I sat with that conversation for a week. Zenon did not tell me what to do. He listened when I wanted to talk and did not push a direction. Then I called my mother back and I asked her to put my father on the line as well. When they were both there, I said what I needed to say. I told them I was not calling to go over old ground for the sake of it. I told them that if they wanted to be present in my life going forward, I needed something specific from them, not a gesture and not a visit framed around the magazine feature. I needed them to acknowledge clearly what was said at that table 2 years ago, not to punish them, not to make them feel a particular way. But because I could not build a real relationship on top of something that one side of the conversation was still pretending, did not happen. My father was quiet for a longer time than I expected. Then he said, I don't know how to say this the right way, but I know what I said was wrong and I know you heard it. He did not say more than that. It was not a full accounting of everything, but it was the first time he had said it was wrong, directly, without adding a qualifier. My mother said she was sorry she had not said anything that night. She said it had bothered her since, and she had not known how to bring it up. I told them both, when you are ready to have a real conversation, I am here. Not to sort out the past entirely, but to see if we can build something going forward that is actually honest. I did not invite them to visit that week. I did not close the door either. Several weeks after that call, I found out I was pregnant. Zenon and I were in the kitchen on a Tuesday evening. We looked at the result together and we both laughed. The kind of laugh that comes when something lands that is bigger than what you were expecting, and it is not bad. It is just enormous. The first person I told outside of Zenon was Zaire. I called him the next morning before he drove to the office. He went quiet for a second and then said, What do you need from me? I said, Just be a good uncle. He said, Done. Within 2 weeks, Zaire had started working on something in the workshop during evenings and weekend hours. A small wooden crib frame, designed from a sketch I had made and left on the drafting table without any instruction. He found the sketch, figured out the dimensions, selected the wood himself, and started building. After that came a small bookshelf scaled for a child's room, made from walnut. After that, a storage box for toys, assembled from pine with a smooth sanded lid and small wooden handles. One Sunday afternoon, I stood in the workshop doorway and watched Zaire sand the edge of the storage box carefully and steadily. And I thought about that bookshelf I had built for my own bedroom at 14 years old. The one my mother called a little project. Zaire was now building things like that in my workshop for my child, and not a single person in our home would describe his work that way. On a warm afternoon toward the end of that same month, Zaire and I sat on the back steps while Zenon moved around inside the workshop. We looked out at the property. The grass was coming in well where we had seeded it in the spring. Zaire asked me, Do you ever regret any of it? I thought about the question honestly before I answered. I said, there are moments I regret how much time I spent trying to get a response that was never going to come. I do not regret stopping. I do not regret any of what came after. He nodded, then he said he thought our parents would eventually call again. I said they might. And I said that when they did I would see where things stood at that point, not with a closed door, not with open arms either, just with clear eyes. That is where I am right now. I own this land. I built this company. I live in a house I designed and helped construct with my own hands. My brother sits in an office next to mine, doing work that is real and that he chose. My husband works beside me every day. And there is a small crib in the room at the end of the hall that's here built from a sketch I left out without asking him to. I am telling you this because I know some of you watching right now have heard a version of that word. Maybe not failure. Maybe it came dressed differently. Maybe it came from someone you trusted, or someone you were supposed to trust. And maybe you are somewhere in the middle of figuring out what to do with it. What I want to leave you with is this: the most difficult thing I ever did was not walking away. The most difficult thing was continuing to build after I walked away when there was no one watching and no approval coming. That is where the real work happened, and if you are in that place right now, I want you to know it counts. Even when no one is looking, it counts. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to step back from someone in your family in order to move forward in your own life? What did that look like for you? Leave it in the comments. I read them all and I mean that. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the time, because there are more stories where this one came from, and I do not want you to miss them. Hit that like button if you made it to the end. It tells me this kind of honesty is worth putting out into the world. Thank you for sitting with this one. Take good care of yourself this week. You are doing better than you think.